Yo, 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 what's up? What's up? What's up? It's your boy, Mr. Never Stop, Never Quit, Repeat, Alan Levi Simmons, and this is season 2 of the Purpose Pod. Yo, episode 1, and I'm so excited to be here today. I have an awesome guest that my buddy Joshua Gould connected me with. I'm so glad that, shout out to Josh. Josh, if you're watching, we appreciate you for connecting to like-minded people who are hungry for purpose and hungry to teach others how to find their purpose and to access their purpose, man. Let me tell you guys, I was on the phone with Traci Philips for the first time for like over an hour. It was like an hour, and neither of us charged each other. It was just free. It was a free, like, I'm just funny, but it was an awesome time, man. And let me tell you, she is equipped with wisdom and knowledge and information. I was browsing through her website, looking through her blog, reading everything, and I was just soaking all of her knowledge and wisdom in. And I just know that today is going to be a great day for all of you to be introduced to Traci Philips. So let me get my breath. Let me catch my breath. So as I said before, Traci Philips, she's a mindset coach. She's an executive. Like, look, listen, there's people out there who they're CEOs who have been through trouble, who've been locked up. They know Traci. I'm telling you, she's the person you want to know. And we're going to dive into that story. And I know y'all just heard like, oh, she talked to people that was locked up. Come on. Yes, people who are in prison have a purpose, but they're just there because of their misfortune. So I'm gonna bring on Traci Philips. What's up, Traci?
Wow, I don't know what to say. I guess like I hope people's expectations are like.
Nah.
How are you, Alan? God, it's so good to see you. It's always good to see
man. It's good to see you. You know, I had to drink some water on that one. You know, I was just I've been waiting for this for like a couple of weeks now, and it's just so ridiculous, you know.
I know that anticipation. There's like throwing stuff out there. I'm like, oh my God, when is it? How many days? How many days?
Yeah, so I'm just excited to do this, man. But Traci, so we're gonna dive into this because you know I've cut the interviews down from an hour to 30 minutes, but we're gonna try to stick within the 30 minutes. If we go a little over, we go a little over. It's okay. I'm not gonna rush this because I am excited to have you on this show. You know, so to dive into this, like you first told me, like French was the foreign language that you were so dedicated to, and you were learning, and you began to learn language, and with that you were able to see inside of people and to see or to hear their language and how they were talking, right? So can you just dive into how was this French, you know, learning helping you with discovering the purpose for other people?
So it's like you make it sound so glamorous. Actually, the real story behind it is and I've always had the ability to read patterns in language. I just didn't know it until later in life. I was always told that it was a troublemaking kind of personality trait, you know, like you're being nosy, you know, why are you questioning? Why are, you know, all that stuff that we as visionaries get a lot. But in general, no, but when I was in 5th grade, I was in a private school and it was mandatory to take a foreign language at that time. Yeah. And so I had to pick between Spanish and French, and everybody was taking Spanish, and you know how we all are. Everybody goes one way, we go the other, right? So everybody's taking Spanish. I decided to take French, and I was the worst one in the class. I struggled so bad. In fact, it was so funny when I went back to my middle school to tell my middle school French teacher that I had gotten a degree to teach French. I thought I was going to give the woman a heart attack. Like she's like, what? I mean, I would be the last person any foreign language teacher would have thought would ever end up teaching other people because it was so bad. What I did well was mimic. And I think that's, again, to the listening, to the mirroring, to being able to read people and really get them at a depth. You know, I was really good at looking French, sounding French, but I couldn't for the life of me remember the you know, vocabulary. Right. It's like, just give me a cue card and I'm good. But that, but I persisted, you know, and I think most of us who are made the way we are, we have a challenge in front of us, and, you know, that's like a dog with a bone. So, you know, the more that I was challenged in it, the more I wanted to overcome it.
Come on, dog, with the bone. And overcoming, like, a lot of people don't have that inside. Well, no, let me stop there, because what you talk about is what's inside of people. And I don't want to say a lot of people don't have that fight inside of them, because I just believe they haven't been coached how to access the fight within. So that's where you come in, and we'll talk about that, guys and girls. We'll talk about that. But so visionaries, you just mentioned visionaries, and a lot of your work is with visionaries. So how did you get into working with visionaries?
Well, I think I've worked with visionaries for quite some time, but it was the beginning of 2020, after we went into quarantine, that, as most people, I kind of took a step back and really tried to assess, okay, what's important, now that I had the time to do so, or I was making the time to do so. And one of the things that occurred to me is that, because I've been trying to really focus, and I talk to my clients about this, on niching. And I know different people feel different ways about, really niching yourself in the market. But I really felt that, that was going to be what was going to help me. And I read the book, and it was actually a recommendation from a client of mine who's absolutely visionary. And he said, have you heard of the book Rocket Fuel, which is by Gino Wickman, who developed the EOS system for the entrepreneurial operating system. So for business owners to help them with their internal operations. And he wrote the book Traction, and then later wrote the book Rocket Fuel, which is about visionaries and integrators. And I mean, it was so clear to me. I thought, oh, this is exactly what who I am, but it's also who I'm drawn to and who I help, right? I call myself the visionary of visionaries, because I can understand where visionaries are coming from. I can read them so well, because we speak the same language, but visionaries need someone to hold their vision for them too, right? Just as, it was, who was it? I always forget his first name, Roger Bannister, who broke the 4-minute mile. He opened the door to so many runners being able to do that. Before that, we thought it was not possible for a human being to do that.
Right.
So, that's what I mean by when a visionary comes forward and is able to see that and be that, then now that's modeled for the rest of the world. That it's like, if one person has done it, then I know that the capacity or the potential for me to do it is there as well. So, I kind of fell into it by identifying it after the fact, which is what oftentimes happens, and what I talk to my clients about when we're trying to, pinpoint and define that innate value within them.
Yeah. And that's powerful, Traci. Like when you just talking about that, like when you see someone break through the barriers that everyone said it was impossible. That's not possible. You're human. It's not possible to write 100 books in your lifetime. It's not possible to speak to 20,000 people or whatever it is. It's not possible to get somewhere without a degree. And I know we talked about that as well, like feeling, unqualified and, and even just like not even believing in ourselves because, well, I don't have the qualifications. And what if I get into this room full of people and all of those people have more experience than me? And that's something that you came into when you started coaching. And I keep leading myself into these things, but I don't want to go there yet. But, you were surrounded with CEOs who, maybe they had higher learning, maybe they've been in the industry longer than you, but you were able to go there and coach them because visionaries need visionaries. And I love what you said right there, Traci. So I love that. And that's so real. And when we were on the phone, you said something, and I was writing down a whole bunch of stuff, but you were like, so, what do you, when you walk into a room, like, what do you want people to say, or how do you want people to respond? Is that something that, a visionary needs to ask themselves?
Well, I think it's a great question in general, whether you're visionary or otherwise. I mean, one of the greatest things I loved is, and by the way, man, hats off to DJ Davi, because, I love when you get your favorite songs played, it gets you amped and pumped and stuff. And, so it's like being able to enter a room after some of your favorite tunes are being played. It really focuses you in, because again, music is a language, and language communicates with us. And, so for me, I always say, I think about it in terms of when I give a talk, I don't necessarily want a standing ovation. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I get one, that's great, but that's not what I'm shooting for. I always say that after I finish speaking, I would rather hear a pin drop, because that means that people are taking what I just said and it's thought-provoking enough to make them dig in. Yeah. And that's really what I think visionaries, we're here to bring it backwards. Most people talk about bringing it forwards. We see, you know, sometimes light years ahead, and our job is to try to translate it back. And so, you know, when people can grasp a hold of those concepts, those visions that we have, there's nothing that brings us more fulfillment, because that is our purpose, meeting a value, right? So we have a value. I always say we have a value. We want it to be valuable, but when it's valued, we know that that gap has been met, right?
Meeting the gap.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're always looking for gaps, you know, what's missing, what's missing. We're here to solve, you know, the problems of the world. We're here to solve the gaps. I always like these words like gap as opposed to problem, but that's, we look through a lens. I mean, many visionaries have been told, you know, when is it going to be good enough? When, you know, you're always going for next. Well, guess what? That's because that's the lens through which we look at the world. You know, we're here to fill gaps. So we're always going to see gaps. It's not that we're not grateful for what we have and that it'll never be good enough. It's that literally that's our purpose on a larger scale than individually we have, obviously, our missions.
And our missions. And we're going to dive into the missions, because I read your blog last night. Like, I texted you at like 9 o'clock and I was like, Traci, I'm sorry I'm texting you this late, but just read your blog. But and it was awesome. So you talked about missions just now, but filling the gap. Like, let's talk about like people like Steve Jobs. I met Lance Armstrong. I met Robin Williams in Afghanistan, and like we could just list a whole bunch of people in our life, or people that we know that have gone above and beyond the limits, right? And they filled a gap, you know, where people who are hopeless, who did not see a future in acting or singing or whatever it was, they were the first person to do it. And they were like, man, you know what? I can do that. And you mentioned on the phone, I forgot the guy's name, but you said he was born without limbs, right?
Oh yeah. Vidicek is, I think, his last name. I always forget his first name, but yeah, it's Australian. And he was born with no arms and no legs. And if you look at the impact he's made in his life, not only the life he's created for himself, but the impact that he's made, because he's a motivational speaker, especially for those who feel like they really are up against all odds. Right. And, you know, I mean, you can imagine he hops into the room, you know, if you thought you had a problem, suddenly you're like, what I'm looking at's not as bad. Right. And so it's perspective, but then he just, he models. And I think that's, again, what we're all here to do ultimately. It's not what we say, it's what we do that everybody pays more attention to. And so, you know, being it, embodying it. And that's really what we're here to do, because when we try to dummy ourselves down, when we try to, condition ourselves into a box, it doesn't work. It just doesn't. And that's probably where my greatest passion in working with visionaries is giving them permission to be visionary. Because, you know, we're the salmon going upstream, and most of the world are the trout going downstream. And so most of our lives, you know, ourselves included, trying to put us into a box.
Right.
And not only are we out of the box people, we're no box people. Like box, like what's a box? I don't, categorize that way. But in order to belong, we've had to kind of, and so it's a lot of times it's making ourselves smaller, much smaller than we are. And big isn't better. It's simply, it's not a hierarchical kind of thing. It's literally, racehorses. Did I tell you that story about racehorses?
With the racehorse, the thoroughbred,
that was tied up. Yeah. Because racehorses have to race. I mean, if you look at all types of horses, just like breeds of dog, they're not all created equally, and thoroughbreds are born to run. They're born to race. And you can pretty much lock up and tether any horse for an extended period of time. And yes, there will be detriments to that. But if you do that to a thoroughbred for too long, they'll literally go crazy, and you'll have to put them down, right? Because that you cannot tether those of us who are born to go and race, right? So race horses and rock stars. And that's why you tend to, throughout history, see them burn out quick, right? So you mentioned Robin Williams, these greats, absolutely brilliant visionaries. And it's not easy to be at that level, right? That level of energy, that level of intensity, that level of just intent, intellectual, complexity. And most people can't keep up with that. And so it can be very challenging. And so if we're also fighting the boxes, in addition to that, it can be difficult. And so again, giving that permission and giving that understanding, because a lot of visionaries, after having a conversation, they're like, oh my gosh, it feels so good. It's like coming home.
like you know me.
you see me. Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
You're right. And I love that. Like, I feel like I don't belong in a box. Like, I'm this very odd, and I say odd in a positive way, because I like being odd. I like being that guy that, I'm really goofy. Like, I like to act. I'm 32, but I have a kid inside. I have the little kid inside of me that still has joy. That's still a visionary. Traci. Like, when you're a child that could dream that, man, maybe I could fly. And then someone invents an airplane, right? Like, maybe I could fly one day. Maybe, and sometimes, Traci, like, maybe the idea is there, and then we need someone to help shape and shift the way we see things, so that the idea that we initially had can then be created into something that can be real, like an airplane. Maybe, a human can't fly physically by themselves, but you can invent something that can fly you, right? So that's visionary 101 right there. Oh my God, I'm getting excited. Sorry. So
yeah, totally. Well, and that's where the integrators come in, right? So it's finding, first, it's being able to define who we are and be able to stand and own that. Be like, yeah, that fits. That when you try on a really good suit jacket, or you get it tailored and you're like, God, that fits perfectly. That's what we can own. It's mine. It's going to fit me perfectly, but it won't fit everybody perfectly. And once we can do that, then we can start to really see our place in the puzzle, right? That piece that we fit into. And so we start to look at, like, okay, if I know my lane is here, if I go out of my lane, now suddenly I'm not so brilliant. So this collaborative understanding of, if I do, and this is where we niche ourselves in life, even if I do this brilliantly, and we've been conditioned away from it. We've been conditioned not to embrace what we're naturally good at, but to work hard to overcome what we're challenged in. And I'm not saying, don't spend time trying to, hone, maybe weak spots, but honestly, when we put all our energy into trying to strengthen our weaknesses, we're wasting our time.
Wow.
We really are wasting energy and time. We really are here to do the innate stuff, the God-given gifts, the stuff we were born with. That's the zone, what I call zone of brilliance. And then of achievement are what I call the earned and learned, right? So these are the things, once we come out of the womb and we go into school and we have life experiences and we get our credentials and, and all these things, that's what we earn. And although we're conditioned to believe that's our value, that's really supportive value. Our true value is what we were born with. And it comes easy, but we've been told it's not valuable unless you work hard for it. It's not worth anything unless you struggle and you sweat, and it's effort. And so we get very confused as to exactly what our identity or our value truly is. And that's true of everyone, not just visionaries.
Right. And that's real right there. I love that, and you talked about the zone of brilliance, right? And when you're talking about the zone of brilliance, I'm seeing like this road, and it's like, oh man, this is what is naturally, like, I can run this road and I know the curves and I know everything and I feel comfortable in it, but I don't see the value in it. So I jump off of this zone of brilliance, and then I go into this place where I start to not see the value in the journey that I'm in. And man, I keep going ahead of myself in my mind, because I read one of your blogs and it was talking about the journey, right? And you were talking about two travelers. And one of the travelers was so fixated on like all the obstacles that was in his way. And the other guy was just kind of like, facing everything as it came so that he could enjoy the journey and his zone of brilliance in that. I'm just kind of adding that on there. But, and so Traci, can you please, you could talk about those two travelers that I just mentioned, but could you dive into zone of brilliance? Because a lot of people, like you said, everyone has a zone of brilliance that you were innately given at birth, right?
Absolutely. And oftentimes it's the very thing that we're most challenged in. Because if we think about something that you've had to work for, to get back. It's not that you've had to work to establish it. You may have to work to redefine it and realign it. So in other words, when we come out of the womb and we're stripped of our innate value and we're told, you're not valuable until you produce something valuable. We go out into a conditioned world and we start to look around to see for other people to mirror back to us what's valuable. And we're like, oh, well, I could do that. And so we start to train ourselves again, our learned and earned skills. And then again, we are taught, no, you're supposed to work hard. Actually, if you're working hard, that's good. So we tend to embrace our challenge areas and not our natural abilities, because our natural abilities, as you just said, are too easy, and that's not hard. And so the more, and you just put the right words to it, the more we push that away, the more we forget. We forget what we truly are here to deliver through that value. And then we finally get to some point, whether it's an identity crisis or, something happens where we start to go, wait a minute. Or somebody tells us, like in my case, when I was asked to work at federal prison with some inmates, the woman who put together the program said, I'd love for you to come in and help these men understand their internal communication, how that's affecting their external communication and then their outcomes, because you read patterns in language. And I looked at her and said, what?
Right.
And she was the one that started, because she had worked with me. She had kind of had this experience with me doing it with her as a client. And she figured it out. She's like, it's called language profiling. You listen to someone's language and I'm like, oh, that's what I'm doing. I didn't even know. So then I had to reclaim it. I had to bring it back up and out and say, okay, how do I do that? What is the value of that? So now I start to dive in. And that was really when I first started to identify this thing called innate value, right? So zone of brilliance plus zone of achievement equals zone of impact. And that's our legacy, right? That's what we're here to create and leave behind.
Yeah. I love that. And that amazing story of someone seeing what was inside of you, a visionary seeing what was inside of another visionary. And and like you as a coach, I could see why you would do this. And you're so gifted, and it's natural for you now to give back what somebody else gave to you. She actually coached you into getting into your zone of brilliance. And like I see it in you, and even when I'm talking to you on the phone, and even reading your blogs and just looking at your site, and I'm observing this zone of brilliance. It's excellent. Like I was like, she's an excellent writer. She's she knows what she's talking about, and she sees the value in it. And a lot of people are doing things that they don't even see the value in. They just see the financial success. And maybe that's what happened with a lot of those guys that were in Butner prison. Like they saw the value in the money that they were making, but they did not, like you said, the inward, they did not see the value within. So now their inward, the lack of value that they see in themselves, they now reflect something else in the world, and it's negative, and they're doing things that are not beneficial to the inner person inside. So yeah, I could go on with that, but you got me on that one.
I love that. Thank you. And thank you for acknowledging me in my zone of brilliance. I mean, because I could also spend time, and what's the point in any of us doing this, spending time trying to say, oh yeah, you should see me when I dance, or you should see me when I try to play an instrument, or I am definitely not in a zone of brilliance. But there's no reason to do that. We don't need to humble ourselves purposely. Where we're most humbled is when we step into what we were given to deliver value to the world through. That's the humbling. I mean, when I get off of a client session and a client has had a massive breakthrough and is just really they're relearning who they are. Yeah. I get off the phone sometimes, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so humbled to this work. Like, thank you for putting me in this position, giving me these gifts that I can bestow on others, because, to me, it's oftentimes like a doula, right? Doulas help women birth babies. I feel like I help people birth themselves back to themselves.
Come on, doula.
And it's very fulfilling, because many times I feel like I'm just holding space, and they're identifying and having that ability to see things at a much deeper level and having that intimate moment with themselves where they really recognize what their true identity is. And I'll tell you, there's very few things that are more beautiful than that.
Yeah. And Traci, I just, while you were talking, I was thinking, like, what if you never answered the call, in a sense? Like, what if you told her, no, I won't go help these guys out? Like, have you ever thought about that? Like, what goes through your mind when you think about that?
I think something else would have happened that would have brought that bit forward. I mean, that's one of the things that I find when you have those, I call them drop moments, right? Like when somebody drops you.
Right.
And sometimes the drop moment can feel good, like, wee, like being on, a ride, amusement park. And other times drop moments don't feel good at all. And, I learned early on in my career through a big drop moment where a guy told me after a presentation, he approached me before a presentation and said he was thinking he really wanted to work with me. He had looked me up and researched me and talked to people who had worked with me, and he was very impressed and all that. And after my presentation, he basically just walked up, handed me his business card and said, I don't want to work with you. If you want to know why, call me.
Wow.
And he walked away, and that was a drop moment. And, after my ego had a field day on the way home driving, like, who does he think he is?
Right.
I remember vividly driving into my garage and thinking to myself, well, I can stay self-righteous and it'll get me nowhere. Or I could lean into this uncomfortable moment and I could learn something. And that man was the one that told me about 8 years ago that he couldn't work with me because he watched me and I wasn't in my heart space. I was operating intellectually, and he needed a coach that could help. He wanted to bring out the ability to be more open in his life. And he knew that was about opening his heart. And he says, I saw you and I knew you weren't anywhere near having an open heart. So there was no way you could help me.
Wow.
And I really, what was interesting is when he said it, I didn't know why it was true. And I didn't know how it was true. I just knew it was true. And it was very humbling to be able to lean into that. And so when I got home, my husband's like, well, so how'd the conversation go? And I was like, well, he told me this. And he says, well, what does that mean? I was like, well, I guess I need to go on a heart opening journey. And he's like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I have no idea.
I don't know. I just gotta go.
No, I didn't know what I didn't know. Right. So here I am at the beginning of a journey. And at that point, I started to learn that when it gets uncomfortable or when it gets super, super exhilarating, there's going to be something, and you want to pay attention because it will come back around again. But why waste your time? You might as well get it the first time.
Exactly.